Tony Beets arrived in Canada with just $200 in his pocket.
He built one of the biggest gold mining operations in the Yukon, became the highest-paid personality on Discovery's Gold Rush, and is worth an estimated $15 million. But even now, in the middle of mining season, Tony Beets still sleeps in a modest trailer on the claim, wakes before sunrise, and puts in 12 to 14-hour days alongside his crew. This is the story of how a Dutch farm boy who once milked cows for a living became the man they call the Viking, and what his life actually looks like once the cameras stop rolling. Tony Beets was born on December 15, 1959, in the small village of Weymouth in the Netherlands. His family made their living the way generations before them had, working a dairy farm, tending cattle, and getting by on whatever the land and the cows gave back. When he was still a boy, the family relocated to Bergwoerd, in the province of Friesland, where farm life continued much the same: early mornings, physical labor, and very little room for anything else. Life on a small European dairy farm in the 1960s and 70s was not glamorous. Families like the Beets worked long days for modest returns, and children were expected to contribute as soon as they were old enough to be useful. According to accounts from those who have covered his life, a defining moment came when Tony's father was seriously injured in an accident, forcing a young Tony to take on far more responsibility on the farm than most boys his age would ever have to carry. Whether it was hauling feed, tending to sick animals, or fixing broken-down equipment, Tony was thrown into a world where problems didn't wait for anyone to grow up first. That environment shaped him in a way that would echo through the rest of his life. He developed a fascination with machinery, early the kind of instinct that lets someone listen to an engine and know, almost by feel, what's wrong with it. That mechanical intuition would eventually become one of his most valuable assets, long before anyone in Wegenes had ever heard the words placer mining or Klondike. It was also on that same stretch of farmland where Tony met the person who would become his partner for life. His family and the family next door were neighbors, and among that neighboring family was a girl named Minnie. The two grew up alongside each other, and what started as childhood familiarity slowly turned into something more serious as they got older. By the time Tony was in his early 20s, he and Minnie were a couple, and both of them were beginning to wonder whether their future really belonged on a small Dutch dairy farm or somewhere else entirely. In 1980, at 23 years old, Tony made the decision that would change the entire trajectory of his life. He chose to leave the Netherlands for Canada. The plan, as the story is usually told, was for Tony to go first and get established. Minnie had other ideas. She wasn't interested in being left behind, and the two of them made the move together, trading the familiar fields of Friesland for a country neither of them knew especially well, and a language that wasn't their own. Immigrating in your early 20s with no guaranteed job, no extended family nearby, and no fluency in the local language is a difficult undertaking under the best of circumstances. For Tony and Minnie, it meant starting from nothing. The early years in Canada weren't spent anywhere near a gold claim by most accounts. Tony spent a stretch of several years working in construction, taking whatever labor-intensive jobs he could find while he and Minnie tried to build a foundation in their new country. It's worth pausing here on something that doesn't always make it into the highlight reel: the emotional weight of that decision. Leaving your home country in your 20s, marrying young, and betting your future on manual labor in an unfamiliar place is the kind of choice that looks bold in hindsight and terrifying in the moment. Tony and Minnie didn't have a mining empire waiting for them. They had each other, a strong work ethic inherited from their farming backgrounds, and a willingness to do whatever job was available. The turning point came in 1984, when Tony made his way north to Dawson City, in Canada's Yukon Territory, a place whose name is inseparable from gold mining history, dating back to the legendary Klondike Gold Rush of the late 1890s. Dawson City in the 1980s wasn't the tourist-friendly, well-documented mining hub it is today. It was still a working town built around placer mining, populated by people who understood machinery, weather, and risk better than almost anyone else in the country. Tony didn't arrive as a trained miner. What he had instead was the same thing that had made him useful back on the farm: an understanding of engines, hydraulics, and heavy equipment, and an unwillingness to quit when something broke. In an industry where a single mechanical failure can cost an entire mining season, that kind of skill set made him valuable fast, even to people who had never heard of him before. Yukon placer mining is unlike almost any other line of work. The season is short, typically only a handful of months where the ground is workable before winter locks everything down again. Success or failure for an entire year can hinge on a few good weeks in the summer and fall. Equipment failures are constant, injuries are common, and there's no guarantee that the ground you've invested in will actually contain the gold you're hoping for. It's an environment that rewards toughness and mechanical know-how in equal measure, which happened to be exactly what Tony brought with him. Over the years that followed, Tony worked his way up from hired hand to equipment operator to claim owner. He learned the terrain, the permafrost, the water systems, and the endless list of things that can go wrong when you're trying to move tons of frozen earth in search of gold. Piece by piece, claim by claim, he began building what would eventually become Tamarack Inc., the mining company that carries his name into the modern era of Yukon gold mining. Tamarack Inc. grew into one of the larger and more established placer mining operations in the Yukon, holding rights to land across multiple creeks and river systems, including areas like Paradise Hill, Scribner Creek, and stretches along the Indian River. Running an operation at that scale requires more than luck. It requires managing dozens of employees, maintaining a fleet of heavy machinery worth millions of dollars, navigating environmental regulations, and making split-second financial decisions about where to dig, where to walk away, and how much to reinvest each season. Tony's mining operation in strong years has reportedly pulled in gold hauls in the range of 1,500 to 2,000 ounces of gold per season, figures that, depending on gold prices, can translate into several $1 million of value before accounting for the enormous operating costs that come with running heavy equipment around the clock for months at a time. That's the part that rarely gets emphasized enough. A mining operation of Tamarack's size isn't cheap to run. Fuel, machine maintenance, payroll for a crew of dozens, and the constant need to replace or repair equipment eat into the gross value of whatever gold comes out of the ground. One of the boldest moves of Tony's mining career came when he purchased what's now known as the Viking Dredge, a massive, decades-old floating gold dredge located at Clear Creek, reportedly for around $1 million. Dredges like this one are mechanical relics from an earlier era of mining, built to float on artificial ponds and chew through gravel and gold-bearing earth on a scale that modern excavators can't match. Restoring and running a machine that old as its own kind of gamble parts are hard to find. Corrosion is a constant threat, and a single major breakdown can wipe out weeks of production. But when it works, a dredge like the Viking can process ground far more efficiently than conventional wash plants, and it's become one of the signature assets of Tony's operation, and one of the most recognizable pieces of equipment on Gold Rush. Today, Tony's equipment fleet is valued at several $1 million on its own, including large excavators like the 950 model, heavy dozers such as the D11, and industrial welding equipment used to keep everything running through brutal Yukon winters. Very little of it is financed. Much of what Tony owns, he owns outright, a detail that matters in an industry where debt has buried plenty of ambitious miners before him. Behind the machinery and the mining claims, Tony's story is fundamentally a family one. He and Minnie built their life and their business side by side, and over the decades, Minnie has taken on a role that's just as essential as Tony's, handling the company's finances, paperwork, and day-to-day administrative operations. Running a multi-million-dollar seasonal business isn't just about digging in the right spot. It's about payroll, permits, budgets, and keeping a company afloat through years when the ground doesn't cooperate. That's Minnie's domain, and by most accounts, the operation wouldn't function without her. Tony and Minnie went on to have 4 children together, and all 4 have grown up around the mining business in one way or another, with several of them actively working within the family operation as adults. It's become something closer to a mining dynasty than a single-generation success story, with the next generation of Beets learning the same trade their father learned by necessity decades earlier, except this time with considerably more resources behind them. Not every part of that family's story has been easy. In 1992, Tony and Minnie lost a daughter, Jasmine, who passed away at just 2.5 months old. It's a loss that doesn't get discussed often, and understandably so. It's not the kind of thing a family owes to television cameras or to public retelling. It's mentioned here only because it's part of an honest account of who Tony Beets is, a man whose life, like most lives, includes real grief alongside its public successes. Tony first appeared on Discovery's Gold Rush during the show's second season back in 2011. He wasn't introduced as a main character. His first scenes involved him giving advice to fellow miner Todd Hoffman about drilling test holes, essentially serving as an experienced voice from within the Yukon mining community rather than a headline personality. But it didn't take long for audiences to notice him. Tony's appeal was immediate and easy to understand. He had the blunt, no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent decades solving real problems under real pressure, a thick Dutch accent that made every sentence land a little differently, and an outspoken streak that regularly got his dialogue bleeped for language. That combination earned him an affectionate nickname back in his hometown, Tony Peep, a playful nod to just how much of what he says on camera has to be censored. As the show's producers and audience gravitated toward him, Tony's role expanded season after season, and his pay grew right along with it. Various accounts of his Discovery Channel compensation place his per-episode rate anywhere from the low 5 figures in his earlier seasons up to a reported $150,000 to $200,000 per episode in more recent years, figures that would put him among the highest-paid personalities on the entire show. Combined with a full season's worth of episodes, that television income alone can add up to hundreds of thousands, if not more, in additional annual earnings on top of whatever his mining operation pulls in from gold. Part of what's kept him such a fixture on Gold Rush is that his story genuinely lends itself to television. He's not performing a character. He's running the same kind of high-stakes, mechanically demanding operation he's run for decades, just with cameras now capturing the equipment failures, the risky bets on unproven ground, and the family dynamics that come with running a business alongside your own children. Viewers have responded to the authenticity of it, even when that authenticity means watching things go wrong in expensive, dramatic fashion. Not every headline involving Tony has been about gold totals or salary figures. In 2015, an episode of Gold Rush captured one of Tony's employees pouring gasoline into a dredge pond and setting it ablaze, a stunt that came to be known, somewhat jokingly on the show, as a Viking baptism. What played on television as a dramatic, almost mythic moment turned into a real legal matter once regulators got involved. The incident led to charges under the Yukon Waters Act, and the employee involved was fined $1,725 as a result. It's a useful reminder that operating a mining business in a heavily regulated environment like the Yukon comes with real consequences when things go wrong, even when those things happen in the name of good television. Environmental oversight in the region exists, specifically because mining, especially at the scale Tony operates, has the potential to affect water systems, fish habitats, and land that matters to more than just the people digging in it. For an operation the size of Tamarack Incorporated, staying on the right side of that regulatory line isn't optional, it's part of the cost of doing business. So what does $15 million in a starring role on cable television actually buy a 60-something former dairy farmer from the Netherlands? By most reliable accounts, the answer is less flash than you might expect, and more substance. The Beets family owns a winter home in Arizona, where they reportedly spend time during the off-season once the Yukon mining months wrap up and the ground freezes over for winter. It's a modest, practical kind of luxury, a warm place to recover after months of brutal cold and 18-hour days, rather than an ostentatious mansion built to impress anyone. During the actual mining season, Tony's living situation looks a lot less like wealth, and a lot more like the demands of the job, staying close to the claim, often in a basic trailer, because gold mining doesn't leave much room for a daily commute from anywhere comfortable. On the more indulgent end, Tony is known for owning a Mercedes convertible reportedly valued at around $145,000, a detail that occasionally surprises people who picture him strictly in work boots and coveralls. He's also reportedly a collector of firearms, including high-caliber rifles, which fits with a broader picture of a man who appreciates well-made, heavy-duty equipment, whether it's parked on a mining claim or sitting in a garage. Beyond that, the bulk of what Tony has built isn't the kind of wealth that shows up in flashy purchases. It's tied up in the business itself, millions of dollars in mining equipment, claims across multiple creeks and river systems in the Yukon, and a company that continues to generate revenue season after season. Unlike a lot of wealth built on paper assets or speculative investments, Tony's fortune is almost entirely the product of physical labor, mechanical problem-solving, and decades of showing up when the weather was miserable and the odds weren't guaranteed. What separates Tony's story from a lot of reality television wealth narratives is how little his day-to-day life seems to have changed despite the money. Even now, well into his 60s, he's still reportedly putting in 12 to 14-hour workdays during the mining season, 7 days a week, regardless of weather conditions. Rain, mud, snow, or brutal cold, the schedule doesn't bend for comfort, because gold mining in the Yukon operates on a strict seasonal clock. Every day the ground is workable is a day that has to be used, because winter will shut the whole operation down again soon enough, whether the season's targets have been met or not. That kind of relentless work ethic is, in many ways, a direct through line back to his childhood on the family farm, waking early, tending to responsibilities that don't pause for excuses, and understanding that comfort is something you earn after the work is done, not before. It's a mindset that doesn't disappear just because someone becomes financially successful. If anything, it's part of what made the success possible in the first place. Tony has also built a reputation within the mining community as someone other operators, even competitors, turn to for advice, thanks to decades of hands-on experience with the specific, brutal challenges of Yukon placer mining, shifting permafrost, unpredictable water systems, and machinery that has to survive extreme temperature swings. That kind of respect isn't something a television salary buys. It's earned through years of solving problems that most people would simply walk away from. Tony Beets' story is, at its core, a fairly old-fashioned one dressed up in modern reality television packaging. A young man leaves everything familiar behind, works his way up from nothing in a brutal, unforgiving industry, builds a business with his own hands and his wife's steady management, and passes that business down to his children. The gold, the television salary, and the 7-figure equipment fleet are the visible parts of that story. The less visible parts, the decades of physical labor, the risk of losing everything on a single bad season, and the discipline required to keep showing up, are really what built it.